the thing is, it's just
you
that,
can
like,
even go and see this though, dude. Like, this is why people get it wrong, right? I agree. You were obviously playing with some pretty bad teams in LCS, so I would never compare those years to like prime EU years. But even so, let's go with the one that people remember, which was last year when he was in Golden Guardians, right? When he was in that team, like, especially in the spring split, when they were actually like, they were almost like top 4 at the end of the split. Like, they were actually doing pretty well. Like, in that particular split, you can go see it then in season 9. We're talking 7 years after the guy's prime. You go and watch the team fights. If they win them or lose them, he plays correctly in nearly all of them. I guarantee you can go back and look now, mate. There's so few way he misplays them. Now, listen, we could definitely have disagreements on should he even have picked that champion? Should he even play that way at this point in time? Yeah. Those are all valid. But once the game's begun, once the machines started, he usually played it out correctly. Like, I even thought, actually, even the way he laned in the modern day was pretty impressive. Because even though I do think he definitely didn't put enough attention at all into like helping other lanes, like he could have done that a lot more because he was just trying to get little edges for himself. Even so, some of the matchups he was able to play were ridiculous. Like I say with like the Vel'Koz example, like you're not supposed to do anything with a champion like that. Like, it's supposed to just be a bad pick. That became one of his best picks, too. At the time, when everyone else was picking Karthus jungle, they had to ban his Karthus mid lane, for fuck's sake. Again, this is what people don't know. People make this conflation, which I want to get your take on, actually, where they make the mistake of thinking that because all these criticisms of Froggen are like, doesn't roam, doesn't try to help his teammates. They make it sound like he just sat under his tower farming and that no one could ever attack the guy. Like, he was still playing the lane correctly. Like, he was still playing aggressively in lane. He just wasn't going for kills all the time. That's different.
Yeah, his Karthus was an extreme example of that. I think that was probably the champion that he played the most aggressively in Season 9. My counterpoint would be that, like, all these things are a great baseline to have, but the way that you supplement this advantage is by at least being good enough at the other styles that becomes your trump card. So, for example,
you got to keep people honest, I always say. You can't just do one thing or that's too obvious that you're going to do that. You just can't plan it.
So essentially, if you're able to have this advantage, the way that you get people to play into that advantage is you make the champions that are OP in the situation. So in mid lane, you have champions like Aurelion and Akali that are prevalent for the last like 3 years. Aurelion not so much in Season 10, but he didn't play that much in Season 10 anyway. But like at this time, these are champions where, and Silas came into the meta in Season 9 as well. These are champions where if you can play them at a good enough level that the enemy can't just leave them up versus you, and you force them to ban the champions that are OP, like you prove competence on those champions, then I feel like it makes what he does really well. So the Orianna, the Vel'Koz, the Anivia, the Karthus, it makes that so much better because then they have to make decisions where, hey, do we just ban out this guy's Karthus or do we ban out the OP pick? And I felt like he was never able to actually do that. So teams were
actually where, for me, mate, Power of Evil sort of took what he did, but did it a bit better in the modern day. Because Power of Evil at least does keep you somewhat honest in that regard. Like, he'll always have a couple of like meta champions that are pretty strong that you have to potentially ban.
Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I'd say that like Power of Evil just has the main weakness of Power of Evil is that he just doesn't seem to be able to play Akali. So that's the one champion that keeps on coming in and out of the meta that you need to at least be able to play at a reasonable level. And like Froggen, neither of them seem to play it well enough to actually force teams to be scared of it. Like there was no fear of a team banning Karthus and then him playing Akali and then dominating the matchup anyway. So I think that's something that you have to like. The consistency is almost a downside in that way because he's so predictable in what he does that people can just prepare for it, ban him out, and it's not necessarily like, because the way people frame it is, well, Froggen's the best player, so if you ban out Froggen, then the team's worse. Well, if you're the best player, then you need to be able to do other things that force the team to still have you be the center of attention, even if you ban out a couple champions. So for me, that was always something that I felt was weak. The other thing that I think is pretty weak in Froggen's game is when he's in the game and other people do accrue advantages, being able to like adapt to that situation, I think was weak from Froggen. So if Hanser somehow ends up with 2-3 kills in lane, his ability to change his mindset from like, I'm trying to get strong in this game to like, fuck it, I'm just going to play for this guy. Like, I just need to try to enable him to carry the game in the best way possible. That just wasn't there for me for Froggen in most of his career. It seems like he was the best when he was the star, but when somebody else started taking over the game, it was like he couldn't really adapt. He's like, okay, well, if you're doing well, just keep on doing what you're doing, and I'm going to keep on doing what I'm doing, and then we'll like win because I'll be ahead and you'll be ahead. It wasn't like the
let me give you an
synergy in between
analogy.
lanes.
Right, there's certain types of players. This kind of goes along with that theory I've been putting out this year about how there's like a difference between a player who's good at the game and who knows how to win the game. Like it's a different conception of how to play the game. Like in a similar sense, I actually think there are some people in games that aren't even that good at the game or even their role, but they're just really skilled players. Like an obvious example for me, I'll give you a classic jungle example, would be the old school player Insec. I don't think this guy was ever actually that good a jungler. Like I don't think if you ever sat him down, he had that great concept. You know what I mean? Like, but he had just insane mechanics, and the sort of players he would go for was so out of pocket that became an advantage in itself. And so as a result, if you had this guy in the game, it's not like having fucking Score or like Dandy or one of these players who's like, they're going to control the game and play smart at all times. But just having this guy in the game, he might just win the game for you. He just might do something fucking mental that doesn't even make sense. And so in that regard, I don't think he was ever a truly great jungler or the best jungler, but he was definitely one of the better players at a certain point in time, just with the way the game actually played. So one area I would agree with you, for example, is if you want to make this distinction, if mid lane had always just remained what it was for the first 2 or 3 years of Froggen's career, which is mainly, it's in theory the strongest role once you get to a team fight, arguably AD carry is, but then again, if the AD carry is the only strong one, you're probably not going to be in that good position when you get to the team fight. So it's the one that you want to be able to scale up to a good team fight. You want to be able to and potentially lock off the fact that the other team can play through mid. That helps if you have priority all the time. Yeah, eventually it became this role about roaming, what you can do with the rest of your kills. Basically, how do you take your advantage and spread it over the whole map instead of just in your lane? That's the flaw, is if Froggen doesn't know the second half exists, like what else you can do with the role. If the role was just your lane and then you play a team fight, he would still have been one of the best players ever. His problem is the role itself became a different role, essentially. Mid lane became something different. Like as we were saying before, in the early days, mid lane was just a different type of AD carry, essentially. You just do what you want. So that's the main problem for me, is I think he was a good player, but I don't think as a mid laner, he had the conception of how to play the game. Like, for example, you didn't have to go back that far. One of the craziest things to me immediately about someone like Perks when they came in the league was, here's the difference. When Caps came in, he was just going for crazy players like solo queue. Perks already, even though he didn't have like the mindset of the game down, you could already tell. Yeah, you could just tell the way he played. Like I could just see him absorbing like a sponge all the shit from Mithy and Trick and the actual smart players in his team as to how you play the game. So I would agree in that regard. Like to me, I actually think this is something you can compare with sports. It's often the same also in sports. When you have a really great player but they're on a bad team, they all tend to go into this mindset we're describing where you just become too selfish, essentially. It's like you yourself buy the hype that like actually all my teammates are shit and I'm the only one who has any chance to win. So eventually you just become too selfish in doing that. So, I mean, I can't say that's a positive. It's obviously a mad negative, isn't it?
Yeah, and the question I would ask you is, how big is adaptation to you in the game of League of Legends? Because to me, I think that's one of the things that is required for a player to be on that super elite level, is the ability to adapt to many different circumstances. And like players like Caps nowadays, Caps on mages is amazing, and then you put him on melees and he's amazing, and you put him on split pushers and he's amazing. Like he can go from the Rise to like the classic mages like Orianna Syndra to the Sylas to the Akali almost seamlessly. It's like they're all just insane in their own way. And I felt like one of the and for another example would obviously be, and this is the reason why people always compared Caps to Faker and they would call him Baby Faker, is this is how Faker was for so many years. Yes. He would go from the Assassins in Season 3 to his mages were the best. Like when he had to go into like Victor and stuff like that, he was the best of that. When he had to go into tank champions, like when he was playing Galio mid every game, he was the best Galio in the world. It's like everything he touched was just fucking gold. And I feel like the problem with Froggen is his inability to adapt. It's almost like there is some lack of knowledge on like the final part of trying to end the game by being strong, because I feel like in the early years a lot of the fights came with less reason behind them. People would just kind of fight seemingly randomly towards the
just
middle
around
of
an
the
objective randomly, or just because of the time. Like you say, if you're having a fight you just fight.
Or like somebody would just see an opportunity, see somebody that they thought they could kill, just go in. There wasn't as much thought between how you're going to set up lanes, like what were lane assignments in the late game. How do you want players to be, formated on, how do you want the formation of the map to be and the formation of team fights to be that will optimally give you the best chance to win? Like that was something that was really lost. That's why in Season 4, Season 5, when Koreans understood the idea of flanking in a team fight, it was so revolutionary. Like people didn't really flank in team fights in North America. It seemed like it was it was top laners and tanky people in front, mages in the back. You fucking go into the enemy team and you keep that formation. Whereas people started understanding, hey, if you come from different angles, it throws off the enemy team's formation, because what happens if no one's marking the flanker? Then he just gets it to the back line, and he's now in a better position in the team fight than he would be if he tried to go through your entire front line. So all these things, I think, ended up happening, and Froggen never seemed like he was able to find the last step to actually win. Like, how do you take the advantage of, okay, you farmed, you farmed, you got your items, you're strong, your teammates are decently strong as well, you have Baron, whatever. How do you actually win the game from that position? I feel like every Froggen team just became super slow. That's what everyone kept on saying, and
they did. They all just played the same way, basically, for about 5 years.
Yeah, every single team was a Froggen team, and I guess that would be like, why is that? Why is that every team that this guy plays on, doesn't matter what the team is, they just are super risk adverse, and they don't actually take the advantages that they can get. And in earlier seasons, it wasn't the same as it is now. It wasn't you win one team fight at 40 minutes, you can just end the game. That's something that Riot purposely put in the game. They made it easier to end because they didn't want these games going to like 70, 80 minutes. Yes. I mean, I fucking played an 80-minute stage game before.